Hi everyone, taking a look today at footage which I shot during AusArmourFest 2024 at the Australian Armour and Artillery Museum, and this is of the museum's example of the Jagdpanzer 38 or Hetzer, which was a late war tank destroyer that was built in the Czech Republic. This vehicle was built using production facilities and a chassis architecture that was borrowed from the early war Panzer 38T tank, which I've also done a video on in the past. The design for this tank destroyer was approved and production was ramped up very rapidly during the period of December 1943 through to March 1944. And that was because of bombing raids that occurred in Berlin in November 1943. Now those raids had significantly damaged a factory that was operated by a company called Alkett. And Alkett was the factory, if you remember from some of my other videos, where the StuG III Ausf.G tank destroyer was being built. In October of 43, just before that air raid, Alkett had produced almost 400 StuG IIIs, meaning that they were making up to 19 Sturm artillery battalions or Abteilungen per month. This lost production could not be tolerated at the front lines of the Eastern Front and the Italian Front for too long, and panzer units were heavily dependent on these tank destroyers to supplement their panzer companies. So as a result of this, the German Waffenamt quickly swung into place plans to produce two new vehicles, the Stug IV, which was a vehicle that mounted the StuG III style casemate on a Panzer IV chassis, and the vehicle that you see here, which was the Jagdpanzer 38. Now initially the Waffenamt looked at producing the StuG III Ausf.G in the ex-CKD plant in Prague in the Czech Republic, that was now being called BMM. This BMM factory had been making the open-topped Marder III tank destroyer since April 1942. Unfortunately, the plant infrastructure was not up to the job of producing the StuG III, and it's because the cranes there were not of high enough capacity to deal with the StuG III's 24-ton finished weight. Maximum crane capacity at BMM in the Czech Republic was 13 tons. So a new fully enclosed casemate style tank destroyer using a modified hull and running gear from the Panzer 38T and the Marder III was rapidly designed. By the 8th of January 1944, drawings were completed and a wooden mock-up had been built and production approved by the end of that month, with an order for 2,000 vehicles being placed. Now, being a Jagdpanzer, this vehicle is not a tank. It's a self-propelled anti-tank gun that's intended to be deployed on the flanks of battles to stop counterattacks. They're usually employed together in batteries of 6 vehicles, with the platoon consisting of 2 vehicles, and they were to hide in cover, pick off enemy targets at long range, and consequently, unlike tanks, they were typically only lightly armoured and had no turret, with the gun having limited left-to-right traverse on the assumption that threats would almost always be coming from the front of the vehicle. Now from the side here you can see the chassis layout, so the vehicle itself was about half a metre wider than the Panzer 38T that it was based on. The tracks were widened from 29 centimetres to 35 centimetres, and you can see the rear idle wheel has 8 holes in it. That was one of the mid-war updates to the rear idle wheel. Back here you've got the engine, so it's a Prague 7.8 litre 6-cylinder petrol engine, 118 kilowatts, which was an uprated version of the engine that powered the Panzer 38T, thanks to a 5-speed Prague-Wilson transmission at the front and then to a planetary steering system. Top speed of the vehicle was 42 kilometers per hour. Now, each of the suspension units is very similar to that on the Panzer 38T, so you've got 2 bogies per side using leaf springs to articulate the wheels. However, the wheels were bigger than on the Panzer 38T, being 82 centimeters in diameter instead of 77.7, and there's 1 return roll, which is 1 less than the Panzer 38T. Production commenced in March 1944 at the BMM factory, which was formerly CKD, as I mentioned, in Prague. Skoda in Pilsen also joined production from July 1944, and a total of 2,827 units were built by May 1945. Now, post-war production continued under a contract to the Swiss Army, with the modified vehicle being called the Jagdpanzer G13. Now, this particular vehicle at the museum was built in January 1945 and it was damaged in battle on the Eastern Front and sent back to the factory for refit. It was ultimately updated and provided to the Swiss Army as one of their G13s. Now, the main gun was a 7.5cm Panzerjägerkanone or Pak 39 L48 gun. It could carry about 41 rounds of ammunition, and that gun could only traverse in a relatively limited arc, 5 degrees to the left, 11 degrees to the right. Now the Pak 39 fired the same armour-piercing projectiles as the Pak 40 gun, and it was also the gun that was fitted to the Jagdpanzer IV tank destroyer. So that meant it could fire the Panzergrenadier 39 AP capped ballistic capped and Panzergrenadier 40 AP composite rigid rounds, albeit with a lower propellant load than the Pak 40 could. Now that Pak 39 could penetrate about 85mm of angled armour at 1,000 metres range, and it had a muzzle velocity of 750 metres per second. Early production variants of the Hetzer were fitted with a muzzle brake, but these were removed from later production vehicles and also in service because that muzzle brake produced a lot of dust and tended to give away the ambush position. Now at the top of the turret there you can see the remotely fired roof-mounted 7.92mm MG34 machine gun. That could be fired from inside the protection of the fighting compartment, and it was aimed by looking through a periscope. Now the armour on the Jagdpanzer 38 was relatively thin, but it was heavily sloped, and that was to try and keep the weight down in line with the production limitations of BMN. So the rear and side armour was only 20mm thick, the frontal armour was 60mm thick, but being sloped back at 60 degrees meant that it had almost double the effective thickness. One of the changes, late war modifications you can see on this version of the tank is a redesigned gun mantlet. This mantlet was about 200 kilograms lighter than the original mantlet and helped reduce the front-heavy nature of this vehicle, because with the gun at the front and all the running gear and the transmission, the vehicle tended to be somewhat nose-heavy. Now it entered service in July 1944 and was one of the most common late-war German tank destroyers. It was available in relatively large numbers, given that almost 3,000 were produced, and was generally mechanically reliable, given that it had been around for some time with the same engine and driveline. Its small size made it easier to conceal than larger vehicles, and excelled when it was placed along predetermined sight lines where the enemy was expected to approach from the front, and it could be used in these defensive positions to support a prepared ambush. Well, that's everything I want to say today about the Jagdpanzer 38 or Hetzer that's here at the museum. I want to thank you for getting to the end of the video and listening to me bang on about this tank hunter. I look forward to talking to you soon about another armoured vehicle or artillery piece, and until then I hope you stay well and we'll talk soon. Thank you.